Elias, I think you'll have to switch off your video as well.
No, you won't appear.
Oh, you won't appear. Okay.
Yeah. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen who have joined us on this Dr. Fundi channel. My name is Fundi Lenyati. I'm the host on the channel. Today, being a Sunday, we are going to have our regular Sunday feature that we call the Salute Sunday. This is a feature where we invite a person whom we believe has done great things in their, profession or area of endeavor, and we would like that person to come and inspire us and also answer a few questions that are related to their profession. So today, our special guest is Mr. Gundo Maswime. Right, now, as is customary here, when we have a special guest, we also request their biography, a short bio, so that we can introduce them very well. So I'm going to introduce Mr. Maswime, and then we welcome him officially once I've done that. So who is Mr. Maswime? Right, Mr. Gundo Maswime is a qualified civil engineer who obtained his Bachelor of Science degree at the University of Natal. That's my alma mater. But he was not satisfied with just getting that BSc Civil Engineering degree. He went further and did a Bachelor of Social Science honors degree in public policy at the same university. Thereafter, he spent 4 years as a consulting engineer, and he also studied public procurement at UNISA, project management at Varsity College, and joined the public sector. He worked in key infrastructure clusters in 4 municipalities across 2 provinces over a 15-year period, working with some of the best municipalities, but also some of the most challenged municipalities, right? And during his time, in public service, he concurrently completed a master's in public admin with specialization in municipal infrastructure management, right? And he did this in, University of Pretoria with a focus on the municipal infrastructure management. All right. So here we're dealing with somebody who, loves burning the midnight oil. He's done also programs like municipal finance at VITS, public procurement cert in UNISA, and also, labor-intensive construction. And as an executive director for infrastructure, he pioneered the Infrastructure Nerve Center, an online purpose-built project management platform and payment facilitation application. He's going to tell us about all of these interesting things. At this moment, he currently conducts research to petition government to review some policies, refine implementation strategies and protocols, and to scientifically re-evaluate approaches to infrastructure development. He's also joined UCT as a lecturer in urban design and civil engineering practice. Mr. Maswime, welcome to the Dr. Fundi channel. And right, now welcome then to our channel, and thank you so much for making time to be with us. Like we were talking before the show, you've got limited time because we've got another meeting lined up in 2 hours from now. So we need to therefore be efficient with the use of time. Right. So just to kickstart then our conversation, I've read your bio. You've done great things. You are still learning. You are doing your PhD with UCT. But before we get to that side of you, I just want to know you as the person behind this unconventional engineer. And in fact, you must tell us also why you call yourself an unconventional, engineer. All right. So, where were you born? What kind of family? Were you a last born, first born, middle child? Yeah, just tell us a little bit about yourself and, where you were born and the kind of family that you grew in.
All right, thanks, Fundile. I was born and raised in a village called Chiramba in the northeastern corner of South Africa, just before you crossed the Valle River into Zimbabwe.
Yes.
I was born in a family of 5 where I'm the third born, right in the middle.
Yes.
And my parents, Mr. Maswime Edward, was a politician moonlighting as a school principal. But he didn't last until 1994. He appeared somewhere along the line. And my mother was a nurse. She just retired last year.
Yes.
In the village, that puts you amongst the elite families.
Yes.
So that is basically my background. I was raised there. I never left until I was 16 years old.
Okay. So you're saying your home was at the border with Zimbabwe. So I would then, think that your father must have been one of those people who was facilitating the crossing by the MK, soldiers and APLA soldiers and people like that.
Yes, indeed. He was. He had to start a sugarcane plantation to hide them and their weapons, and they would only come out at night. So we were just surprised. There's a big sugarcane plantation going up, but the sugarcanes, when it's time for them to be sold, they were sold at a loss. So only much later we realized the real motive was not to sell sugarcane, but it was to plant
to facilitate.
I can hide people. So that's what he was doing full time. But during the day, he was a school principal.
Yeah. So as the middle child, would you actually say you are a typical middle child who's a hustler, who makes things happen, who doesn't wait for things or expect things to be done for him, like we normally see with firstborns and the lastborns?
As a middle child, you get the best of both. You are able to take responsibility almost like the firstborn. And you are also able to see what gets you into trouble. When the lastborn is doing it. So you are very balanced.
So if we reflect back, your dad was a teacher, and also your mom was a nursing professional, and those two professions, like you said earlier, kids who come from those kind of families, education used to be and still is, one of the top priorities. Now, but just looking at the values, that were instilled in you, which of those values from early days do you think are still the compass, that guides you now as an adult and as a professional?
I think the important thing that my parents told me about my career was they would say to me, it doesn't really matter what you become. Even if you become a policeman, the idea is once you are in the police force, identify the main problems that need to be solved, develop yourself in that area and become the best. Because at the end of the day, an entry level, let's say medical doctor, and the it's not as celebrated as the police commissioner.
Yes.
Somebody who has taken their career in the police force to the highest level. So that was what was constantly told to us growing up, that it's not so much what career you go into, it's what you then do while you're there.
Yes. So excellence, in other words, whatever you choose to do, try to be the best you can be.
Yes, you have to be the best you can be.
All right, just touching on your earlier education, and I'm not going to go into detail here because we need to spend more time, tertiary and your working life. But, whenever I think of Vhembe as the district in Limpopo, one school that almost every year we see that they have got excellent results, 100% pass, is Mbilwi. Now, did you go to Mbilwi or you went to another school?
I went to a school that I believe is better than Mbilwi, and I know Mbilwi guys will not take that kindly. And I'll tell you why. I went to Tengwe High School. The main difference between Mbilwi and Tengwe High School is that Tengwe High School takes the normal villager.
Yes.
The feeder primary schools are just the local primary schools. And Mbilwi seems to attract the best kids from all over Venda. So for that reason, I think the fact that Tengwe has constantly come a very second close to Mbilwi High School, it does mean that there's something great. But we used to have some of our teachers go to Mbilwi and sit in class for a week or two, just to take notes to see what they're doing, and then they would come back and see and strategize again. So there's some synergies between the schools. It's not all competition.
That's beautiful. So, all right. So basically collaboration between the top schools in that part of the world, because it's a district in Limpopo that has got the most number of schools and the most number of matriculants, that actually sit for any exam on any year, in Limpopo. So that's why, I was doing some work for the Department of Education there, and that's how I got to understand, the work that is being done by some of those schools. All right. How did you then choose that, post-matric, I am going to do civil engineering? When did you make that decision? Is it something that you made even before you started secondary school, or you concretized that idea and made the decision, in your latter years as a matriculant?
Yeah, definitely it came much later because in the village, the professions that we used to see was the local doctor who would come on Wednesdays to the clinic, and the dentist, and the rest really were teachers and nurses and policemen and so on. So I went to varsity in the mid-90s, 96 to be precise. But my passion for that section of maths that had to deal with angles and so on.
Geometry.
Yes, it's what I was looking for, something that will express my prowess in geometry. And when I went to varsity, I just knew if you are doing science at school, you do BSc. If you are doing commerce, you do BCom. So I came to UCT to do science, and I ended up studying botany. But it was when I was at the university, the career guidance started happening. And then, then after leaving UCT, I went to teach for a year while I was raising funds, and I went to do civil engineering after that. So it was quite winding.
Yes, that's why I said in the poster, a tortuous, journey to being this, unconventional civil engineer. The very thing that made you to choose engineering, which is excellence in geometry, is the very thing that made me clear that I am not going the engineering route. Because, in some of the diagrams, you used to have to look at them and decide which theorem to apply. And sometimes you must put a certain line to create, and be able to apply a theorem. And I could get all the theorems in my head, but to apply them, in diagrams, that was my challenge. So I told my brother, no, engineering is not for me, and when we got to Natal, the guys were doing civil engineering. They used to complain of something called drawing. They'll talk about elevations, north elevation, south elevation, and all of that. How did you find those early years in engineering, doing drawing?
Yeah, you did well by avoiding coming to engineering if you had those type of issues. In fact, back then, in universities like UCT, I think, and Stellenbosch, they used to, as part of the interview to study engineering, they'll give you holograms where you look in and tell them what you can see.
Yeah.
Because there are some students whose mind just would not open up to that dimension.
Yeah.
And you'll find they're excelling in all the other subjects within engineering, but they are just not able to see that this building, once you look at it from this angle, this is what you would see, all those projections and so on.
Yeah.
So I was one of those that battled, but not because I couldn't imagine it, but because I just did not have a technical school background. I didn't go to a technical school. So those that had done drawing before in high school, they had a much better chance. So it was a matter of, we used to do drawing, I think, on Thursdays, and I would stay in the drawing room until 10 at night while others finished at 3, because it was between 1 and 4. So most of the guys go at 3 and I would stay until 10 at night. But at the end of the semester, I was doing well. I could leave at 7 in the evening.
Beautiful.
After one supplementary exam, I was able to to pass it the next time. Yeah.
And the other course that the guys used to complain about was calculus. Also, again, around first year, a lot of guys were, excluded after the first semester because they did badly in calculus. How did you find calculus?
At least not in the first year. In the first year, I found it to be easier to manage. It was when it came later as partial differential equations. I just felt this is too rigorous for what I want to do when I finish the degree. But they said, so some of these courses we're just doing to stretch your brain. It's not necessarily that you will be applying La Hospitalis rule or any of those things. But it was challenging and exciting at the same time.
Yeah, and then just one last one. I'm just going back to my memory now, of what the guys used to complain about. There was another course, I'm not sure whether it's in third year or fourth year, something about materials, strength of materials and stuff like that. That one was it was not an easy course to manage. So my approach to the course was, I'll go and sit in front. Yeah.
And if the lecturer mentions any sentence that I don't understand, I'll stop him right there. Even if at the end he will end up saying 10 things, I knew there was a rule that there's no limit to the number of questions a student can ask. So I think that made him to notice me first, because I made it very tedious for him to teach. And he knew he wouldn't have me in class the next year again. So that meant I needed to pass the course. But it was not a nice course to do.
All right. So you had your SAP, and but otherwise you then cruised through the 4 years of training. I think the other course was something to do with stats. I think in the earlier years, the guys would say, I've just, I'm writing stats. But once they've had a SAP, and then you say, why did you come back early? No, this statistics. So they call it in full after they've got a SAP. Once during the year they were giving it a nickname, called stats.
Yeah, we were calling those supplementary exams the summer conference.
Yes.
You come back a little bit early. Yeah.
Right. But anyway, on a serious note now, so you cruised through and then you got your, BSc in civil engineering. At the end of that 4-year training, obviously now you had achieved the first part of your goal, to be a civil engineer. Um, what kind of skills, and here I'm not talking really, I don't want to be specific in terms of, I could build a building or whatever. I'm talking about skills that are portable. When I compare medical doctors and people who've done engineering, one of the challenges that I used to see and I still see is the fact that we get to be very challenged when it comes to thinking out of the box on stuff that we have not seen before. All right. And I'm sure my colleagues are not going to be hit with me saying this, but I find that, engineers, their ability to think strategically, thinking laterally, and all of those things were actually quite developed. What skills would you say from that 4-year training are still very useful? And then I'm not talking specifically, on civil engineering, but skills that are portable that you could even use in leadership and management.
Yeah, I think the fundamental difference between engineering and a discipline like medicine, for example, is that there is very little to commit to memory. They are training us on getting into a situation, looking at the natural laws that apply, and looking at each situation on a case-by-case basis, and applying the principles and solving a problem. And then our problems are very localized. What you find in the Valle is not what you're going to find in Pretoria. And so for each design, you stand back, you make your own assumptions, and so on. So I think that is what is fundamentally different about engineering. But what you learn at university, you learn to think.
Yes.
And when you go to work, you learn to look at a situation and apply your thinking abilities and think laterally and so on.
Yeah. All right. Anyway, so you finished your BSc in civil engineering, but you decided to take honors in social sciences, honors in public policy. Why that decision?
Okay, in part, it was when I was studying, I worked part-time. I worked for some consulting firms part-time. Yes. And what I realized the design flaw was that the conversations about how government works and what government was about was generally very negative. It was people who approach it, who look at government as being just inherently inept, inherently corrupt, and so on. So I already had the curiosity to know what exactly, how exactly does government work? How do they arrive at, for example, the kind of policies that guide our day-to-day work, our standard operating procedures, and so on. Yeah. So my interest came from there because I already knew then that I would want to later on participate in public service.
All right. Okay. So because you knew that you wanted to be part of the problem solvers in the built environment, utilizing your skills, then you wanted to make sure that you understand the policy, thinking, in that space. All right. And then you went further and did a master's in public admin.
Yeah. That was a natural step because once you understand the policy process, you understand that the policy process comes from politics and all the multiple stakeholders that have an input. And then now the policy is on your desk now to implement.
Yes.
The process of implementing, the organizing, the planning, and so on, that is now public administration.
Yes.
Yes. So I understood what was supposed to happen from a policy point of view.
Yeah.
But I felt I needed more insight on the implementation side. So that is where public administration came in. And fortunately, President Mbeki had an agreement with the French government to put together some programs for African students to study public administration with a specialization in infrastructure. So in South Africa, University of Pretoria was offering that, and there were two other universities elsewhere in the continent, Makerere in Uganda, one university in West Africa. Yeah. So I decided I would rather go into that program. Because that it had a bias towards public infrastructure.
Yes. And I think, just as a layperson in your space, one thing I know that there's a lot of projects that get started, but implementation is our Achilles heel generally, especially in some of the more rural kind of provinces, like my province, which is the Eastern Cape. So, I mean, by you doing something that was actually going to address the implementation challenges, I'm sure then, you gained quite a lot in the country. So out of that program, what were your highlights? And you said that you specialized in municipal infrastructure.
Yes, yeah. The highlights, in fact, the way you have brought in the question, the background you were putting before the question, that's actually my master's thesis. So I was thinking, did you take your research even to read?
I asked wifey.
Yes, So unfortunately, mostly because of the media, the challenges of our government are reduced to incompetence, corruption, and cadre deployment. And I wish for that day that we solve those three, because then we'll start to solve the real problems. Because in my opinion, those are the problems that get most of the airtime because they're exciting to read about. But what came out of my master's program, combined with my experience in practice, was the fact that we have got a first world legislative framework for delivery of public infrastructure, which works very well for those parts of our country that look first world, like Cape Town, Johannesburg, and so on, but doesn't work so well for Lingana or Chilamba, where I come from, the more rural municipalities. So that was an important observation that some of our delivery problems are tied directly to our legislative framework and our standard operating procedures. And the moment you skip one of them, the Auditor General will come for you, and the Auditor General's report, when it goes to the media, it's called corruption. Even though that's not what the age is talking about, but in the media, when they say unauthorized expenditure of 2 billion, it's reported as if 2 billion was stolen.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. All right. So you did the public admin, and by that time you were already working. Were you in Pretoria at the time?
I was in. When I finished my master's, I was in the Valle. I was working.
All right. Okay. Now let's start, because I think if I remember well in our conversation in December, I mean you had some of your best time, I think in Pretoria before you went to the Valle, and just looking back then, and contrasting the Valle where you worked with a number of challenges. What is it called now? Mfuleni or something.
Mfuleni, yeah.
If you contrast Mfuleni and Pretoria, on the extreme ends, what lessons are there for the country?
I think a more interesting comparison is between, I worked in Mid-Valle, which we just learned last week that is ranked second in terms of financial viability of all municipalities in the country, and definitely first in Gauteng. So while I was working in Mid-Valle, I would, of course, drive around, look at the area, and then I saw Sharpeville, the one that my father used to talk about. I said, I would want to work and solve, I think they have bigger challenges here. But what you see between Mid-Valle and Mfuleni, what will shock you first is that at executive level, the team in Mid-Valle was less qualified than the one in Mfuleni. I couldn't wrap my head around the fact that the best performing municipality does not have a team as well qualified as the one in what is considered to be the worst performing municipality. So that was the first conundrum I had to wrap my head around. Secondly, I think what was more obvious is that Mid-Valle has got the largest land area of all the local municipalities in Gauteng, but the least population. And Mfuleni, on the other hand, has got at least 6, 7 well-populated townships. So with a history of non-payment, except for the fact that there was disinvestment after the global economic meltdown of 2008. The steel industry curtailed their services, and other industries also disinvested there. So the real challenge between that faces Mfuleni is that their revenue base compared to the size, because that's the biggest local municipality in the country, actually. So it is those aspects that will not come through in media reports. What will come through is mostly corruption, and after a while, you will find that because no one seems to be getting arrested for it, and people have question marks. What exactly is happening? But the media will not easily change the narrative. But I think we need to create the structural issues as well.
So, so in terms of human resources, there was that clear disparity, but performance-wise, the one with less qualified people was actually performing better. All right. In terms of infrastructure, I'm talking about now investment in infrastructure. Any clear disparities there? That maybe one benefited a lot in the pre-1994 compared to the other in terms of investments, and therefore with the infrastructure and the overloading with the population, maybe one is suffering more.
The infrastructure in Mfuleni is poorly located and inadequate, in the sense that it was not anticipated that it was going to support the kind of population it's supporting now. The rest of the people were in the periphery and would come in only when they have work to do in the towns. So there was that, but also to note that the infrastructure in Mfuleni area, as elaborate as it was in these towns and the cities of Vereeniging, Vanderbijlpark, it was hardly maintained after 1976. So before 76, you can see a bit of maintenance happened, but after 76, there was hardly any maintenance because the budget after the, well, of course, first it was the Sharpeville incident, then it was the Soweto incident, and the budget moved to defense, to policing. So there was less expenditure on infrastructure upgrades and more on the police, on policing and the military and so on. So things started from that time, and by some stroke of luck, there was no collapse in the main sanitation infrastructure because the valve sits on clay. So what happens is that after the pipe is completely destroyed, that round form of the clay can still support the flow of sewer. Yes, but the pipe is not there. So when we put cameras through, you realize there seem not to be a pipe, but the shape is there. You know, so there were scary things like that in
Fundi.
In Mfuleni, yes.
Yeah. Oh,
but
okay.
I think we also have to note that Mfuleni should have been funded as a metro, but it's been funded as a local municipality.
Okay.
That doesn't help. It's the biggest local municipality in the country, but in my opinion, my experience, the funding of Mfuleni should have been the funding of a metro.
Yes. Okay. So that's a serious problem, though. And I mean, for the last 3-4 years, we have been, reading in the news about issues relating to water and sanitation in that part of, Gauteng, to an extent that the SANDF had to go in there to try and solve the problem, but the problem is still there. So you're basically saying what they were going to do there maybe is likely to have been more of a band-aid type of intervention than, what is really necessary.
Yes, because the big issue, which is what the Human Rights Commission raised there, was the pollution of the Valle River. But the pollution of the Valle River is in part due to the failure of some of the wastewater treatment plants in Mfuleni. But those wastewater treatment plants, like the Sebokeng one, 25% of the storage they are treating is coming from Gauteng. A portion comes from Mid-Valle. So the Valle carries the rest of Gauteng in terms of water supply, because the Valle Dam is there, the pumping stations are there, and so on. And in fact, the existence of the Valle was so that water can be made available to support the operations in the mines in the Rand. So Mfuleni carries the responsibility for the region, not just for itself. And for that reason, they are finding that they are having to maintain some massive wastewater treatment plants, and with very little assistance. Yes, so I think that remains a challenge.
Yes.
And I knew when the army came that they are probably going to try and stop storage from flowing the street here and there. They will be plumbing on an issue that requires a more sustained intervention.
Yes. All right. Now that we have got to the point of, water and sanitation challenges, obviously we're talking here, about, Mfuleni in Gauteng. But this week, there has been a lot of discussion, since the Department of Water and Sanitation mentioned that there are 24 Cuban engineers that have been brought in to assist with issues of, water and sanitation. And this has caused whole lots of, negative talk from South Africans. And so as somebody who is firstly a civil engineer, somebody who's got so much experience at municipal level on matters of infrastructure, and now somebody who is in academia and is also doing research, I want to get your sense. We are told South Africa does not have, water engineers. What is a water engineer?
Well, civil engineering has got 5 branches, or depending on how you look at it. So there's the structural engineering. It still falls under the umbrella of civil engineering. Then there's water and sanitation engineering, which also falls in, and within it there's hydrology, as was wastewater treatment, and so on. Is what sub branches within it. Yeah. But a water engineer would be somebody whose main exposure and experience has been in the water space, but with the South Africa trains engineers at university level that are able to move between the various specialties. In some parts of Europe, you are trained as a water engineer from first year, but we are trained on water structures, geotechnical engineering, and transportation engineering, and environmental engineering. So a water engineer is really just a branch of civil engineering.
So you guys here are more of, you start as generalists, and maybe specialize a little later if somebody really wants to be there, as compared to the Europe, where some people may specialize from the beginning.
Yes, and we can't even call it specializing in our case, because I can spend 10 years doing structures, and when somebody says there's a wastewater treatment plant to be designed, then you pull the design codes and you still do it. Or if somebody says there's a road to be done, you still do that. So there's a lot of movement, especially from the engineers that are trained at BSc and BEng level. It's easy to move between the specialties, yes.
And the guys who got their engineering in TVET colleges, TVET, that is, we used to call them technicons. I don't know what they're called now.
Yes, okay. So if you go to a university and do a BEng or BSc, you are an engineer when you finish.
Yeah.
If you go to a University of Technology, what used to be called a technicon, and you do your diploma, you are called a technician.
Okay.
And when you then go in to do a BTech later, you are called a technologist.
Yes.
And then further than that, you become a specialist, because you'll do a master's in just one of the schools. The guys that go to a TVET, they are called artisans.
Yes.
Yes. So you can look at them as trained to be foremen in the construction field. They are trained to be the foremen, but the technician and the technologist have got a little bit more insight, and they are trained on the actual work of a civil engineer. But the engineers are trained to think. So if you have a scenario, for example, which is unconventional in its outlook, maybe we have to tunnel through the mountain or something out of the ordinary. So the engineer is able to say, this formula that we normally use for this has to be amended because it will no longer apply. So at university, you are taught on the sources of the formulas and their derivations. As a technicon, you are applying the formulas without necessarily going to the science behind them. Yes. So that is the difference. But at TVET, it's more the practical application of construction, the learned construction materials, and the process of construction itself. So the training is at different levels.
Yeah. So then, but you need all of those people to do the work. All right. So when we are told then that South Africa has got a shortage of water engineers, they are talking more about the guys who have got the university qualification, or are they talking also about the technicians and the technologists?
There is a lady called Dr. Lawson who has written quite extensively about the numbers within the engineering fraternity.
Yes.
And talking about what we have, what we don't have.
Yes.
I have not had a situation before where I was looking for an engineer to do something and found that they are not there.
Yes.
So it might not be very accurate to say we do have a shortage as such. But I think there are other issues at play. You will understand in, I think it was 1981, Professor De Lange, Johan De Lange, that chairperson of the Broederbond then, the first VC of what is now UJ, he was commissioned by government to do a report on where we should be emphasizing our training. to optimize economic development. And in his report, he had noticed that there is a shortage of engineers. But it was from the point of view that if we had more of them, we would be able to do much more and create more jobs and so on. So the government was faced with two options. One was to start training engineers who were from other races, because the engineers that were being trained
were white.
Yes, there was very few black engineers who were likely to be trained 1 year, 1 day, and the universities would be stubborn, sometimes just train 1 or 2. So that report had that option, train from other races, because every white South African that wants to be an engineer is becoming an engineer, but it's still a cynic. So the second option was to go and get engineers from overseas, which is exactly what our government is now doing. And they opted for that. They set up a recruitment office that was that had 14 satellite offices across Europe to try and bring as many engineers from Europe as possible. From 1960 until 1975, they had already been recruiting, but in the 80s, they went even to intensify the recruitment. In fact, in 1976, the construction of Quebec, they had recruited French engineers, a whole lot of French engineers. French engineers came to South Africa in their numbers over the years, even during the years where the sanctions were on. France was one of the countries that busted the sanctions by bringing the engineers when we had sanctions. So it has always happened that we recruit.
So this is not new, basically. The fact of bringing in engineers from other countries. Do you think there would have been as much unhappiness in the country if the people were not from Cuba? Is it not maybe something to do also with the country where these guys are coming from, that we are having, the anger that we are seeing out there?
Look, you are trading on very thin ice there, because in 2014, we had surveyors that came from France and the US. Some of them were even working for NASA. Who were here to change our coordinate system from what we call the RTBS 94 into the International Terrestrial Reference Frame, ITRF. They came, it was not in the news, you needed to be in the fraternity to understand that. We have had engineers come from Germany to help with ESCOM, and they have come, they've done their work, and they have gone back. But we are not the only country that has this exchange of engineers. Our engineers also go to other countries. I think the anger in part is because it was done through a formal agreement with Cuba, but that also wouldn't hold, because the examples I'm giving you now are also done with formal agreement. I have read the statements from most of the engineering professional bodies about their misgivings and where they lie, and I have a sense that it talks more to the relationship that exists between the engineering fraternity in South Africa and the government, which is a very important dynamic to note. Cuban engineers have been here. I've worked with Cuban engineers in KZN, and I understand they have been here before in many other places. But in the space of water and sanitation, and which is why the Minister of Water had to really intervene. There are still certain niches that have not trained new engineers, and they have not transformed at all. And you will find very risky things like in dam safety space. You qualify first as an engineer, you get your professional registration with the Engineering Council.
After 3 years.
Yes, and then you get what in medicine you would have called a subspecialty.
Yeah.
Where there's another committee that you now go through that has been set up. And people have protested that it's almost impossible to go through that, and more than 80% of the people with that accreditation are now over the age of 60, which means they are fast approaching retirement. So the minister is also having all those things to think about. And I wouldn't be surprised if this is an experiment to see if bringing in Cuban engineers can open some of those spaces within the water value chain.
Yeah. So you're saying that specialization, there is almost like a gatekeeping by the old guard. I'll put it like that. Which is again something that we know even in our own profession. Some of the specialities, in medicine, are still largely untransformed, and they make life so difficult for anybody, to actually break through, into some of those professions. So it is something that is known, part of the thinking from the Verwoerd days.
Yeah, that because I'm having to be very polite, I'm saying that there is a sense in the industry. There is a sense in which the feeling is that these spaces are not getting touched. And one lesson that the government learned with the RDP, with the Reconstruction Development Program, was that sometimes to use people who do not believe in you doesn't work sometimes. And you will. So there was just a sense in which government feels that they seem not to be getting the right information, or this. It's a sensitive space that they would rather have people who can tell them what. They need to double check. You must understand that our government comes from an intelligence liberation background.
Yes. So there's still a trust deficit.
There's still a trust deficit, yes. And and the response of the industry sometimes is not helping that deficit. It's actually exacerbating it.
Yes. And so a body then, like the Engineering Council of South Africa, that has also been talking around these matters. What role do you think then they are playing or should be playing? Because my understanding is that they regulate the industry, that is now the engineering professions, and they are the ones who almost like, certify or give, that you can practice in this space as a registered engineer. And if you're not a registered engineer under them, you can't sign off on certain, on projects. You have to work under a supervisor and all of that. So how do you then see these guys, working and making a difference without them having to subordinate to those who are registered here? Especially because we are told they are not part of the body. I think there's some international NGO, that's called International Engineering Alliance Accords, that, where there's benchmarking of standards and everything like that. So how do you then see these guys from Cuba who are coming from a country that's not part of the alliance, and therefore question marks around their education standards and everything like that?
Look, I will approach that from a geopolitical perspective. Yeah, in 1989, about 41 countries came together, South Africa included, to sign what was called the Washington Accord.
Yes.
And what the accord is that they will benchmark their engineering standards.
Yes.
So that it will be easy for engineers to move between these countries and work. So the amount of screening that needs to be done is very minimal.
Yeah.
So for obvious reasons, Cuba would not have been part of that. There was all these sanctions are against Cuba. They wouldn't have even listened to
the US might have had a problem with that.
Yes, and if you are calling it the Washington Accord, the second accord was signed in 2001, and it's called the Sydney Accord. The Sydney Accord was now looking at technicians and technologists. Try and benchmark their work so they can move between the countries. But we had German engineers here already after 2000, which means they came after the accord. So it's much easier for those. So for a Cuban engineer to come and practice here, what is first the kind of process that they must go through? It involves going through Malusi to start with, their qualification framework, the benchmarking, which makes it very, very difficult. So now you've got a government that is a signatory of this accord, and the engineering council is a signatory of an accord. Now you have to bring people from Cuba who our government seems to be more ideologically aligned to.
Yes, I mean, fellow comrades, they helped us to get the freedom we have.
Yeah, so a framework has to be put in place to have this done. But having said that, I don't think it will be so much a problem to get somebody to check their work and sign.
It
shouldn't be very difficult.
So from where you are sitting, what are you saying to South Africans, about this particular issue that has been so topical? Are you saying, guys, relax? These guys, they know what they're doing. They are appropriately qualified. There will be checks and balances. There's no need to worry.
I would say the use of engineers from other countries is very commonplace, not just in South Africa, but everywhere else. The question of them taking up jobs, I have heard it being raised many times, that there are graduates sitting at home, and I would say the work these guys are doing, a graduate from any university cannot walk, take off the gown and do that work. It is still quite specialized. Yeah, and I have comfort in knowing that they have, as part of their mandate, been given the instruction to do some skills transfer.
Yes.
So from that point of view, I'm relaxed. But there's a second issue that people are overlooking that I would say there is something for them to think about. The minister seems to be at pains to tell the nation that she would have wanted to do this the normal way with South African engineers and so on. But the processes she has had to follow in her department, the legislative processes,
yes,
have been so drawn out that since November last year, they just couldn't get it done. And so you start to realize that it's easier to get engineers from Cuba to come and do work than to get engineers in South Africa because of the whole procurement system that we have in place. So I think it's good that there was the uproar that we had, but it will make us to think should we really follow a process that is more drawn out than bringing engineers from a far-flung place like Cuba?
Yes. All right. Now, there's a comment that I just want to read for you. It's another, Facebook friend who had written around this matter. So his name is Zandisile Quini. He's saying, he is not saying, this is what he's saying. He is not saying there is a lack of engineers, but in the past, the previous recruitment was to boost white engineers as opposed to mass training of black engineers. So that's his comment, after, the answer that you had given earlier. So, after that study, whether to train or to recruit, the decision was to recruit, and that recruitment was intense, even during the sanctions and all of that. And there wasn't a decision to say, let's train more our local people. So it's just a comment from his side.
Yeah, no, it is a fair comment to make. I don't believe there is a shortage of engineers or even the skill.
Yes.
But there are some logistical issues that have to be taken into cognizance. And when the minister is pushed to a corner, and our law states very clearly that politicians must not even participate in procurement processes. And the processes are dragging on, and people are doing everything to comply and so on. The minister, the buck stops with the minister to solve the problem. So I think that was her main consideration.
Yes.
So I think going forward, we have to look at that as well.
Yes. Right. We've just finished the 60 minutes of our talk. I'm just asking for just 10 more minutes before we wrap up, so that you could be ready for your next meeting. Now, you are at UCT now. You joined them, I think, late last year. Now, being within a tertiary institution that trains engineers, what do you think is the role of universities in terms of helping South Africa to actually have more of the skills that are in short supply? Because even the numbers that we have, I'm sure there's maldistribution between the more urban areas having more of the resources and the far-flung areas struggling to attract somebody to be an engineer in Shabialingan or whatever.
Yes. So the role of the university is twofold. In terms of training, of course, there is the research aspect. But from a training point of view, the university needs to know that you can train an engineer, but you can also train a South African engineer. Because engineering is practiced within a context. And it's the one thing that, to give credit to Cuban engineers, they seem to be more amenable to the kind of engineering solutions you can do in rural areas where you're not using software and so on. The ones that I work with, I found they're almost like the army. You know how the army does. So our engineers find it very hard to work in government. First, because of the political volatility, just within the community dynamic, it's too much. An engineer is going to have to stand up and address a community on an issue that relates to stoppage of projects, the choices that the community needs to make, and so on. So universities must start responding to that aspect because the crunching of numbers and design, we are very, 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 very good. In fact, we are world-class. We are completely unparalleled. To have that training for the context, understanding the policy processes, public administration, and how to interact with the community. That flair needs to be added, because when it's lacking, a lot of our engineers are leaving the country and going to work overseas. Because they went to a township building a road and somebody pulled out a gun on them. Something like that. But in the township, they can see when you are not, I don't want to call it streetwise, when you don't have an understanding of the dynamic, and they will take advantage of that. So I think our engineers need to start being trained on the soft issues within the engineering fraternity.
And so in your involvement then, with the institution that you are in now, which is UCT, where you are the lecturer, that kind of angle, having been on the field, and having been in management as an executive, are you, those kind of insights, is there an opportunity for you to actually, help the guys to understand that success of projects is not only about the crunching of numbers and drawings and stuff, but there's also the other part about stakeholder management.
Yeah, I'm happy that the University of Cape Town is now in a process of doing an extensive curriculum review to incorporate those aspects into the curriculum, because we are now saying we want to be the lead university in terms of training engineers for public service. Because to be an excellent university that we are and be the best in the continent, and exist in a country with the kind of infrastructure challenges that we have, without saying anything about that, but just always making a research output that is being used in Australia and Germany and so on, it's not enough. So that effort is there, and the curriculum is being reviewed very closely to say how can we train a South African engineer for the challenges that we are experiencing. Because engineering as a profession is not is a dynamic profession as well. An engineer in 1981 is not the same as an engineer today. Today, the engineer doesn't wear a white hat only. Back then, only the engineer would wear the white helmet. Everyone else must wear yellow and the other colors. So today, that kind of respect is not there, in part because the communities have seen that engineers have come and done some wrong things in their communities, and now their voice must be heard. We have a framework that encourages public participation and so on. So engineers must start waking up to those realities.
Yes. Okay. Right now, just as we look towards closure of our discussion, you are doing some research that you are hoping to present to government or to challenge government on. Can you just share a little bit? What are you on?
So what we are doing now is we have started to look at infrastructure from an implementation perspective. In the medical field, implementation science is a big thing, because once there is a new innovation or a discovery about how to manage a certain condition, it must now be filtered back into the system, into practice, so that people would then change their management style. So we are pioneering as a research center for excellence in municipal infrastructure, where we are looking at implementation. What are all the things that militate against successful implementation of infrastructure projects? So if it's legislation, we need to challenge legislation and say, what was the reason for this legislation? Can that reason be achieved without the legislation being followed, if it's got a negative impact on the implementation process? So we are looking at the full spectrum of implementation, because South Africa is very talented in policy and legislation. We are completely unparalleled, in the continent. We are very brilliant in engineering, but the two things are not combining to make optimized service delivery. So the challenge is in between, is implementation. So that is where the research is focused. So we are partnering with various government institutions and so on to try and understand the implementation process with the hope to improve it. So that is what the research is about.
Yes. And when are you hoping to have finished that research to be able to share your recommendations with the relevant bodies?
Okay, so the research is to be done in stages. The first stage focuses on planning. How is engineering planning, and how is it being done today? What is engineering planning supposed to entail? Because the engineer plans, and you go to the IDP process, and the people want their road and this and that. What the engineer has planned not featuring there. So the first part that we should at least by end of July, we should have released the first research paper on it. Then the second part will be on procurement. Once you have now planned to procure the services, we'll look at that procurement process through the eyes of an engineer and say, these are challenges. Yeah, so that should be towards the end of the year. Then the next stage is to now look at during the implementation of the project itself. What are the things that make, as you were saying earlier, projects to start and then stop and suddenly there's nobody on site. So we'll look at that area later on, and then we'll look at maintenance as well. Maintenance stage. So that will be the first for the next 2 years or so. But after that, we are going to go full on in building a center of excellence where we bring in industry, we bring in the government, we make them sit down and discuss these things and look at policies and so on.
Yeah. So is your PhD then, studies linked to this research that you are talking about? That's going to be unfolding over the next few years?
Yeah. So my PhD is on the implementation science for infrastructure. So it's right in the heart of it.
Right. Now, just on the issue of, development, infrastructure development and then implementation or rollout, there is this district development model, that is being piloted, I think, in 3 sites across the country. OR Tambo District, Greater Tegwini, I can't remember the third one. Your thoughts around that as a model, that is supposed to ensure more integration and collaboration, reduction of duplication of efforts and stuff like that. What are your thoughts around that?
Okay, so the third municipality is in Limpopo. The name normally slips in my mind as well. So the district development model is a case of government saying our planning is not coordinated. We are working in silos. The provincial government comes to the municipality to build a road, and the municipality was planning to build the same road, and then they decide we are the ones who are going to build the road. Those type of clashes. But generally, the other issue, you'll find 2 neighboring municipalities. One decides they are going to tar their main road. So the main road gets tarred and it stops right where you are crossing to the next municipality. Or you are doing a bulk pipeline, but you cannot do it across the municipal boundaries. So you stop there and the other municipality says it's not a priority for us. So this development model is intended to bring all the planning departments from the local municipalities, the district municipality, the provincial government, national government departments, and parastatals into one room and say, what are your plans for the next 5 years? Then everyone will outline their plans, and then there will be coordination and alignment. But it should also be looked at a case of government saying our IGR, intergovernmental relations framework, has not been adequate to make it happen.
It
needs to be
so you think it will, bring a lot of positives? Obviously it's still at a pilot stage at this moment. You wrote an article in one of the, I'll call it a newsletter, MISA or something like that, where you were saying this solution of district development, is it talking to the right diagnosis? Is it the right approach? I think there was another third question. So basically, you are actually saying overall, you think there's more positives that will come out of it, because then there will be more alignment and less of silo approach to doing things.
That was the Institute of Municipal Engineering magazine / generally. Yeah, but the issue is that when government sees a problem and decides to do something about it, it's better to commend them because there's a scenario where government does not do anything about an existing problem. In fact, I prefer that they will do something even if it's wrong, because they will then learn and realize what didn't work and change again. But something needs to be done about that. So I think what I was at pains about is to notice that the white paper on infrastructure that was written 1997, written around 1997, has got the diagnosis of the problem that the district development model has been made to solve.
Yeah.
And the question is, all those years in between, what has been the effort and so on. But I'm not so worried about those years. I'm more interested in what is being done about it now. There are lessons that we have learned from the pilot sites. That the municipalities in South Africa are very different. Have very different approaches. And when you arrive, you will find others have structures that you cannot bypass if you are going to be planning. The stakeholder to change from municipality to municipality and so on. So it was good to for the government to take the initiative and learn those differences in approach, and that a lot of things might need to be tailor-made from different areas, even though there's still a premium in uniformity, and we would still push for that.
Yes. All right. Just the last one. Before I ask you a question, or maybe just make a comment. What legacy would you like to leave in the space of infrastructure, engineering and all of that, in this country? When you go into retirement in many years to come, what kind of legacy, what would you want to be remembered for?
Okay, there is a finite list of problems that municipalities face in the delivery of public infrastructure. We have them listed because we are very good as a country in listing the challenges and diagnosing them. We diagnose properly. So if I could say, in my time as a civil engineer, in whatever capacity, I have managed to at least put a line on this challenge and this challenge and this challenge. Even if it's one, that change of approach to something that will yield results, I think that will be a legacy that one would walk away and say, no, I didn't get rich, but I solved this for my country.
Lovely. Right now, this one, I know both of you and your wife, Salome, who's also a trailblazer, in her own right as an academic there at UCT. She's an ONG specialist, and now she's a professor of global surgery. Now, she spent a year in Massachusetts, and you had to go and be the house husband for some time, that side. How easy or how difficult is it, to have to sometimes press a pause to support, the endeavors of your partner, especially, in a situation where we come from patriarchal society, where you're supposed to be the one who brings bacon home?
Yes, that's an interesting question that you should have brought even earlier. So our approach to this as a family is that the partner with the best opportunity must be supported. Because at the end of the day, we are just a team that is also trying to make a difference in society. That is what we are. So the opportunity came, Harvard Medical School, and I said, okay, I will have to pack up everything, close everything that I'm doing, so that we can support this, as costly and as taxing as it was. But it's also interesting that you are asking this question, and I'm telling you, there's the meeting I'm going to right now.
Yeah.
That meeting, while I was in Boston with absolutely nothing to do, I used to walk into Harvard and MIT a lot, talk to the staff, find out the research they're doing, and if they have lectures, I would pop in and attend. So this meeting that I'm going into, I've been asked to judge a competition, an innovation competition by MIT students that they do, and it's a very big thing in the MIT calendar. So I've got very good networks that in Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And thanks to that time. So what I've also learned is that in the process of supporting your partner, while you're in that space, just try and make the best out of it. You will be amazed at what actually comes out.
But thank you very much. I've said it before that, for me, you are a model, a spouse, and I see both of you supporting each other at different times. And I think that's how, things should be. Just one thing, it's just a comment. The renewal of registrations every few years in the engineering profession, there's a question from the same guy. Do you think that is an issue, or it shouldn't be an issue?
In my opinion, if you are collecting your PDF points and you can prove that you are still in the industry, that should not be an issue really. I think engineering is more like driving. If you can drive and you are driving, you cannot really forget the skill that is. So as long as there's continuous professional development, the registration should stay in place. What I would have said about the Engineering Council is, I think there should be categories of engineers, like a municipal engineer. I think a municipal engineer should be a different species with a separate type of accreditation. Or engineers who are in the academic space as well. Probably they should have their own kind of accreditation, so that we know what kind of professional engineer we're talking about.
All right. But anyway, let me let you go. You are 35 minutes away from your next meeting. I've actually, dragged this meeting beyond what we had agreed on. So thank you very much, Gundo. And also thank you to, your spouse and the boys, because, you guys, you that couple, you are involved in the lives of your children. I saw you the other time doing the, what's it now? Big Zulu song, coming out of some late in December last year, and you were doing it as a family,
Yes, it was for graduating from the preschool at the University of Cape Town.
Yes, so that was so cool. But anyway, thank you very much, man, for giving us your time. We appreciate you. I mean, Sunday is a family time, so for you to give us almost an hour and a half, we don't take that for granted. So thank you very much, and thank you to everybody who joined us, as we were chatting about matters engineering, and also touching on the issue of the Cuban engineers that have been brought to the country. So till next time, we appreciate you.
Thank you very much.